So as you can see, it's the same pattern that I designed, but I just changed the bottom portion of the hat a little bit. So we use our stockinette skills in the round. All you're doing is knitting. That's all you do to get this brim. And this one, in order to get the garter stitch in the round, you have to knit, purl, knit, purl. So in order to get the garter stitch, you have to knit, purl in the round. In the round. And then I did my ribbed. And then I matched the brim with the top. And I also put the garter stitch at the top. This is the hat that I'm going to make today for myself. So for the top portion of it, after you're done your knit 2, purl 2, you're going to be decreasing your stitches the same way you were doing this by knit and purl. So now we're going to have knit, decrease in knit, purl, decrease in purl. So we're going to have knit 2 and purl 2. So these are some of the basic stitches that are used in a lot of your basic accessories when you're starting to learn how to decrease. So this is from one pattern. So what I did was I measured how long I wanted the hat. I measured the circumference of my head. I made sure I had a swatch to count my stitches in my rows. Make your 5x5 swatch. And then figure out what yarn you want to use in order to make your swatch. And then you will be able to do your calculations. And once it fits accordingly, you will be able to alter that one pattern to learn your stitches if you're still practicing. You will be able to have different variations with one pattern. Isn't that amazing? It's just so amazing how far expanded you can go with just knitting with one pattern. And then you can change up your stitches as you go in different variations. So for today, we are going to work on the garter brim with the knit 2, purl 2 rib with the garter top to finish it out, which means you'll be learning how to knit 2 together and purl 2 together. And this will be knit and purl, and this is in the round. All right, do or not. We'll cast off. So we're doing the long tail cast on method. All right. So I casted on my stitches. I'm just going to recount to make sure I have the right amount. And I do have enough. So I'm leaving my tail a little long because when I have to close up the little bit of in the round, because it won't be perfect, because it's going to be a garter stitch and then the rib close it up, but that little section at the bottom sometimes does not close how you want it. We're knitting in the round. So first off, you want to have knitting needles that are the size of your project. What I mean by that is you want to make sure your knitting needles in the center have a smaller length to creating in the round, because then it'll start curling and everything. You don't want that. So you also want to make sure when you're knitting in the round, make sure your stitches are flat perfectly around and not twisting. So for example, you don't want it to go like this and then you start knitting. because then it's going to start twisting and then you're going to have to take everything out. What we want to do is, since we're knitting in the round, we want to join our stitches. So we're going to go ahead and place our stitch marker right here. Go ahead and knit. Make sure everything's straight and not twisted. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to start knitting. Okay. And see, that's where you'll have that tiny little gap, and that's where you'll be using your tail to just kind of clean it up a little bit. Okay. So now I'm going to purl because we're making a garter stitch in the garter stitch knit brim in the round. So now we're on purl. Okay. Every once in a while, just count your stitches to make sure that you still have the required stitches you need. Still continue to make sure it doesn't twist on you. Okay. And then once it gets long enough, you'll be good to go. So all you're doing is knitting and purling to get your garter stitch for 10 rows before you do the knit 2, purl 2. And then once you do the knit 2, purl 2 for the base of your hat, you measure how high you would like to have the base of your hat, do the length of it, and knit 2, purl 2 all the way to the length you need, and then you will be using the garter stitch to make the end point of your hat as you knit 2 and purl 2 together. And the end point will match the brim of your hat for the garter stitch. So we're at the end of our stitch, and how we know? One, the tail, but also we have our stitch marker right here. We move the stitch marker over. Since we're doing a garter in the round, we're now going to switch over to the knit. So now we're knitting all the way around. Good time to check to make sure if you have all the stitches that are required. So, because sometimes what could happen is you could, split a stitch, knit two together by accident. Your stitches might be a little tighter than normal. And so you end up having your stitches a little different from when you started out. And as you can see, now it's a lot easier to make sure your stitches don't twist, because as you're working it in, it'll stay the same direction that you need. And be careful at the end, because sometimes what can happen is your stitch can get caught in the stitch marker. So you want to also count every once in a while to make sure that you're getting the right stitch by the stitch marker also too. So how we know we're on the purl side? Well, there's your knit stitch, and there's a difference in how they look. That's your knit, that's your purl. We just did the knit stitch. See how it's hiding in there? And so now we are going to purl. The purl is the bumpier that makes the garter stitch. And see how your bumps are now forming? That's how you know you're on the right row. So I'm just knitting and purling the brim. So now we're just going to knit. So I'm doing 10 rows of the knit and purl to get the garter brim. Okay. So we're on our knit. So we did knit, purl, knit, purl. Now we're on our knit. And how you can count your rows, this was the long tail cast on method. See how it loops? The knit, see how it's formed like a V? That's your knit. This is your purl. So you know you're on the right track. There's your knit. Here's your purl. And guess what? There's your knit. And that's how you know you're specifically on the right track as you knit, when you start getting familiar with your stitches. Okay. See how that kind of hid over that stitch? I knew enough to know that that stitch belongs to this row. And also you can tell where the placement of your tail is. So when you know the placement of your tail and where the stitch is, it'll start to come familiar with you where you ended and started if your stitch marker goes over the stitch. So as you can see, it's closing up nicely, but I still wanted to leave this tail because see here, I'm still going to close that up a little more. It didn't make too big of a gap, but it just made the stitches, see how tight that is there? So it made the stitches a little looser, so I'll just come behind and I'll work that. but it closed it up pretty good, like very well done. It's not going to need a lot of altering, but sometimes you will need that. And in this case, you will here. On row 7, and we just did a purl stitch, and how you can tell if you forget or get distracted, the bumps. And there's your knitting. So now we're on the knitting part. And everyone's different on how you want your hat to fit. So everyone has their own preference. And the great thing of having your preference, once you have a pattern and you want to figure out how to design it to how you want, the best way is to do a swatch. And then you can adjust it from there. Now I'm on the purl. So there's your cast on. So when you're counting your rows, don't forget to count the knit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm on row 8. And that's how you know you're on the correct path, on the correct row. So it's knitting up pretty quickly in the garter stitch in the round. This is what it looks like when you're doing it in the round. So you're knit, purl, and it gives you your garter stitch. Like as if you were knitting with straight knitting needles and flipping back and forth, just knit. You do the knit and purl. That's the difference between knitting in the round and doing your straight knitting needles of flipping back and forth. You can also flip back and forth on the in the round also too. Like you don't have to attach it together. You can also work with the garter stitch by flipping it back and forth instead of joining your yarn together in the round if you're more comfortable with that also too. All right, so now I'm knitting. And you can tell it's knit because see the puffier stitch is right on the edge, so we just purled. We're on the purl. All right, so that is done. Now we're going to do the knit 2, purl 2 and around. And as you start knitting the knit 2, purl 2, you can see what the knit 2, purl 2 looks like. And then if you end up knitting on the purl and purling on the knitting, you will see the difference as you go. So the first portion of it, have a little more concentration on doing your knit 2, purl 2 to make sure the stitches are consistent throughout your work. All right, so let's knit 2 and purl 2 all the way around. Yay! All right, we're at the base of the hat. So we're doing knit 2, the last 4 stitches, and we are ending on purl 2, and that's what we want. And woohoo, we did it. We got it right all the way around. We got it right. All right, so now we're purling the last 2. We have our stitch marker. Move that over, and we're moving on to knit 2, purl 2 again, row 12. So we're doing knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl. Okay. And as you can see, the ribbing is starting to form. There's your knit and there's your purl. The puffier is your purl, kind of like the garter stitch here. And your knit is more like a V. All right, knit 2, purl 2. All right. We are on the last row of knit 2, purl 2. And then we are decreasing for the crown in the round. Okay, so now I'm going to decrease the stitches, and at some point I'm going to change to double pointed knitting needles because it is going to start to decrease the stitches, which makes it a lot harder to use in the round. All right, so we are going to knit 2. We're going to purl 2. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 2 together to decrease the stitches. Knit 2. Purl 2. Knit 2. And then we're going to purl 2 together. We're going to knit 2, purl 2, we're going to knit 2, and we're going to purl 2 together. Knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, and then we're going to purl 2 together. We're going to knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, and then we're going to purl 2 together. And then we're going to just knit 2 and purl 2. And that evens out the stitches all the way around. So we're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 2. we're going to knit 2, we're going to purl 1. So we're going to knit 2, we're going to purl 2, we're going to knit 2, we're going to purl 1. So we're going to knit 2, we're going to purl 2. These 2 rows are still your knit 2, purl 2 rows. And then we're going to do the purl and the knit, for the base of the crown of it to get your garter stitch. Okay, so now we're on knit 2. Okay. And just look at your stitches to make sure they match. So now we're going to purl 1 and 2. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl this one. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl 2. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl 1. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl 2. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl 1. And then we're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 2. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl 1. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl 2. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl 1. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl 2. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl 1. Okay. And then we're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl 2 separately. So we're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 2. We're going to knit 2. And we're going to purl 1 because that was our purl 2 together. You need to match your stitches. So we're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 2 together. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 1. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 2 together. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 1. We're going to knit 2. Sorry, we're going to purl 2 together. We knit 2, now purl 2 together. Knit 2. and we're going to purl 1. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl these 2 together. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 1. We're going to knit 2. And we're going to purl 2 together. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 1. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 2 together. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 1. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 2 together. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 1. We'll knit 2. We'll purl 2 together. We're going to knit 2. We're going to purl 1. We're going to knit 2. And then we're going to purl these 2 together. We want to do it this time. Okay. So now we're going to do purl, because we're going to do purl, knit to get the garter stitch. We just finished decreasing some of the knit 2, purl 2, the ribbing. Now we are going to purl 17 and then purl 2 together. Okay. I'm going to have to switch to double pointed knitting needles soon. All right. So we're going to purl 17. All right, purl 2 together. Purl 2 together. And purl 2 together, the last 2 stitches. Okay. All right, and this is part of the garter stitch. Knit and purl. Okay, so I'm going to knit 7. Knit 2 together. Knit 7. Knit 2 together. Knit 7. Knit 2 together. Knit 7. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7. Knit 2 together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Knit 2 together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Knit 2 together. Okay. There we go. We're going to do 4 knitting needles. The 5th one is going to be where you're knitting from. 12, 12, and 12. Eight, 9, 10, 11, 12. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. One, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Okay. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So 12, 12, 12, 12, 12 fit perfect. It's evenly set on the knitting needles, double pointed knitting needles. Now it'll be easier to decrease. So I'm going to go ahead and put a stitch marker that actually hooks, because if you put the other one, it'll just keep falling off. There we go. All right, so we're going to purl 4, and then we're going to purl 2 together. All right, purl 4, purl 2 together. Okay, purl 2 together. Purl 4. Purl 2 together. Okay. Purl 4. Purl 2 together. We're going to purl 4. And then we're going to purl 2 together. Okay. We're going to purl 4. And we're going to purl 2 together. We're going to purl 4. and purl 2 together. Okay. And then we're going to purl 4. And then we're going to purl 2 together. We're going to purl 4. And then we're going to purl 2 together. And we know that's the end because we have our stitch marker right there, as it makes a garter stitch at the tip of your hat as you're closing it up. Matches the bottom of the brim. So we're going to knit 3. Knit 2 together. There we go. Okay, knit 3, knit 2 together, knit 3, knit 2 together, knit 3, knit 2 together, knit 2 together, knit 3, knit 2 together. Okay. Now we're going to knit 3, knit 2 together, knit 3, knit 2 together, knit 3, knit 2 together, knit 3, knit 2 together. And we're at the end of that row because our stitch marker's right here. Okay. So we're going to purl 2 together. Okay. All the way around. Okay. We're going to purl 2 together. Okay. Purl 2 together. Okay. Purl 2 together. Purl 2 together. Purl 2 together. Purl 2 together. Okay. I'm going to purl 2 together. Purl 2 together. Purl 2 together. Purl 2 together. All right, and we're at our end because there's our stitch marker. Yay! We are on the last row and we're going to knit 2 together all the way. We did it! I knitted a hat today! All right, so we're going to knit 2 together. Okay. We're going to knit 2 together. Knit 2 together. Knit 2 together. Knit 2 together. The last 2. Okay, so we should have 8, 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay. Now I'm going to take my darning needle. Just take your darning needle. We're going to cut a bit of a tail. We're going to thread our darning needle. So we want to start right here. And we're doing as if we were going to knit. So we're going to go ahead and just feed the darning needle through the stitches, like as if we were going to knit, but we're putting the darning needle through. Okay. Just thread that through. Take out the knitting needle. Okay, we're going to do that here also too. Just thread it through. Okay, pull through, pull out the knitting needle. And then we're on the last 2. Go ahead and put the darning needle through. Okay, take that one out. And there you go. Everything is secure, so your stitches won't fall out. And then you take off your stitch marker. Okay. And I don't want big holes in my work. Okay. A little bit. We're going to actually secure a knot. Okay. So we're just securing a knot. And then I'm going to do it one more time. And then I'm going to go ahead and weave it in. Now, weaving in is never perfect because you're always going to see, once I cut after I weave in, it's always going to be kind of hanging there. But you still want to try to weave it in as tight as you can. Okay? Kind of crisscross it. Make sure it doesn't show on the other side. And then you go ahead and cut that. I usually leave just a tiny bit more. And see, that kind of hangs there, but that's okay. Because you want to weave in your ends after your knot. Okay? Now what we're going to do is we're going to weave in the last of this one. Now remember I said it didn't close in perfectly? Right about here. So all I'm going to do is just close it in to let it look somewhat more like a knit stitch. Okay. Try to duplicate it as best as we can. Okay. That's why I leave a little bit of a tail, because if I have to fudge this, then at least I have a little bit of a tail to work with it. And there you go. Now there's the little groove, that little bump that kind of matches now. And then what you do is the same thing. Secure it with a knot. And then we're going to weave it in. Tie in your ends. Weave it in, crisscross. Okay? And sometimes I add a little more measure to a little more secureness. Okay? Just leave a little bit of a tail. Okay? Because then when you start pulling it, your tail starts to disappear. Okay? There. There's my hat.